Iraq's Premier Nouri al-Maliki rejects pressure to form a national unity government, calling any such move a coup against the country's constitution. The Iraqi army and ISIL militants continue to battle for control of northern and western parts of Iraq. A suicide bomber detonates explosives at a hotel in the Lebanese capital during a security raid, injuring 11 people. And Libyans vote for a new parliament amid ongoing violence. Good evening and welcome to Al World News. I'm Mariam Khaddar. In a televised speech, Iraq's Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki ruled out forming a national emergency government to confront a militant offensive that has overrun large parts of the country. Maliki described the call to form a national emergency government as a coup against the constitution and the political process. The Iraqi leader also rejected calls for him to step down, saying that his main focus was combating terrorism.
It is no secret to all Iraqis the dangerous goals behind the call for the formation of a national salvation government. It is simply an attempt by those who rebel against the constitution to end the young democratic process and confiscate the opinions of the voters and circumvent of the constitutional merits. The call for the formation of a national salvation government is a coup against the constitution and the political process.
Militants from the Al-Qaeda offshoot of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant have launched a fresh assault on Iraq's largest oil refinery in Baji. This as government forces continue to battle ISIL militants in several towns and villages across the north and western parts of the country.
Once again, militants from the Al-Qaeda offshoot of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant launched a renewed push to seize Iraq's largest oil refinery, which is located near Baji. The attack, however, was repelled by security forces, who said the refinery in Baji was still under government control. Radicals from ISIL have been attacking the refinery, which is responsible for supplying a third of Iraq's oil, for the past 10 days. For the third consecutive week, clashes between the Iraqi army and terrorists from the ISIL continued in several cities, towns and villages. The army is keen to recapture towns and villages that fell to ISIL militants earlier this month. However, the fight to liberate Iraqi territory has been much more difficult than expected. Iraqi security forces are now gearing up to enter the country's second city of Mosul. According to media reports, over 50,000 troops backed by pro-government rebel forces have already deployed around Mosul, waiting for the green light from the country's commander-in-chief. The latest preparations coincides with the army's announcement that they now fully control the town of Tal Afar after almost 1 week of deadly clashes there. On Wednesday morning, ISIL militants attacked one of Iraq's largest air bases located in the town of Yathrib, some 90 kilometers north of Baghdad. Eyewitnesses said that the airbase had been surrounded on 3 sides after militants struck it with mortar fire. Also, at least 7 people have been killed and scores of others injured after militants fired mortar shells on the city of Samarra, north of the capital Baghdad. Meanwhile, at least 6 people were killed and 20 others were wounded after a car bomb detonated in the northern city of Kirkuk. The ethnically mixed city has been controlled by Kurdish Peshmerga forces since the ISIL began its onslaught earlier this month. Meanwhile, thousands of volunteers seeking to join the fight against extremists continue to pour into recruitment centers across Iraq, voicing their loyalty and readiness to defeat and root out ISIL terrorists.
We responded to a call by Marjia and we came. We will go wherever they want us to go, to Mosul, Ramadi and anywhere. We want to die. We want to die in defense of the country.
Over 2.5 million Iraqis have already registered over the past 10 days. The volunteers have been transported to the capital from across the country for a week-long training course before being sent to cities and villages controlled by the militants.
Let's get some more information from our correspondent in Iraq, Mustafa Katin. Mustafa, how are Iraqis responding to Maliki's decision not to form a national emergency government? Is there a sense that this is a step in the right direction?
Yes, actually, today in his televised speech, the Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki actually rejected the concept of forming a national unity government, or as they call it, a salvation government, because, as he said, that there's some partners in the political process in Iraq. They actually they criticize the government and review the government, and from the other on the other hand, they want to have a share of the power in the government. And actually, until now, there are some political figures who want to criticize the army and to show the militants and in Iraq as a rebellion or as just a normal revolution against the Iraqi government.
And how much control does the Iraqi government have over the Baji oil refinery?
Well, actually, the militants and for the past 2 days, actually, they claim that the Baji refinery is under the control of the militants. But the Iraqi government and through the General Qasim Abba, they actually assert that the refinery is under the control of the Iraqi forces. But heavy clashes occurred in refinery Baji and its surroundings, and even in Baji city, the clashes between the Iraqi army and the militants and another terrorist groups are continuing to take place in Baji. Also in Baghdad, just a few hours ago, a car exploded in Mahmoudiyah district in the south of Baghdad, which killed more than 15 score of them. And actually, this is expected because the terrorist groups now are trying to attack the civilians elsewhere in the country, to spread fear and also to confuse the Iraqi forces. But the Iraqi forces actually now are regaining control on several areas and districts which have been controlled by the militants in Jalala and even in Babylon province, and especially in the north of the Babylon province in Jurf al-Sakhar district, and even in Tel Afar, the Iraqi government and now the Iraqi forces, backed with the volunteers, took control on Tel Afar airport, and now are preparing to launch a massive attack to retake the city of Mosul. The people in Iraq and also the political figures or the politicians in Iraq sharing an idea and have a deep sense of disappointment towards the U.S. behavior toward the Iraqi crisis, because they said even there is a strategic agreement between Iraq and the U.S., and especially on the security level, the U.S. keeps silence towards the crisis and dragging their feet when the Iraq government asks them to launch or to conduct airstrikes on the militant hideouts.
All right, Mustafa Kattan, our Iraq correspondent, thank you very much for those updates. Meanwhile, the head of the United Nations mission in Iraq said Baghdad must deal with the advances of the extremist groups militarily, adding that the country's key oil assets are safe, despite continued fighting around the largest oil refinery in Baji.
The part of the crisis that has been caused by the advances of ISIL must be addressed militarily. The success of any military operation hinges on at least three factors. Firstly, the cooperation between Baghdad and Erbil. Secondly, it must be based on an Iraqi-led plan. And third, and very important, it must reflect a certain level of national agreement or consensus between the various communities, because the threat that is posed by ISIL affects every community in this country. The government forces still remain in control of the refinery itself. However, fighting is continuing. And on the broader question of oil, Iraq's oil fields in the south of the country, which are the vast majority of the reserves that are currently used here in Iraq, remain safe and in areas that are under the control of the central government. So operation there should be normal.
Joining me now from London to discuss Iraq's growing crisis further is Hani Ali, the director for the Iraqi Center for Integration and Cohesion. Let's first discuss Maliki's comments earlier. Is the call for the formation of a national emergency government in fact a coup against the constitution and the political process?
Well, absolutely, because you don't need a national emergency government having only had an election just a couple of months ago in April 2014, and the elections were fair and transparent. The United Nations were there, the observers, the international observers, the local observers from the Arab League were there. So you had elections. Why do you need a different set of government that's based on nothing? You had the people's will, which was expressed very clearly in those elections, and that's it. That's the mandate from people.
Well, there has been a lot of talk of external influences regarding the ISIL, but who does the blame lay within Iraq itself?
Well, external influence, people can talk about external influence, but at the end of the day, it's the Iraqi people who make the decision. This is exactly, very similar to what we had just about, 8 years ago when Maliki was not there as a prime minister. We had Jafari as a prime minister, and he was going to become prime minister for a second term. And we had a very similar case in terms of the debacle and the debate and the arguments that were going on about who's going to become a prime minister. But the key thing here is, the terrorism threat that's happening at the moment in Iraq, it's going to have catastrophic impact on Iraq, but also it will have a catastrophic impact on the region, and it will definitely go beyond the region, which is, sort of as far as Europe and the USA, and that's very clear, and many analysts have very clearly stressed this.
So would you say that this conflict with the ISIL, do you think the ISIL is achieving its goal of forming an Islamic caliphate?
Well, they tried very hard, and it wasn't sort of, a simple plan. They had planned this for quite a while. I hear that plans have started 7 months ago. There's, of course, even the Washington Institute mentioned that the Saudi Arabia funding to ISIS is very clear. So there is funding from Saudi Arabia and Qatar to these terrorist organizations. The aim for them is really to disturb the region. They, of course, cannot stand against the Iraqi army. Despite all what the media said, Mosul, it was a case that we had 30,000 local policemen leaving their duty. It wasn't quite the Iraqi army. There's this misconception that says, well, the Iraqi army can't hold up. Well, you just mentioned about Beji refinery. 7 coordinated attacks by ISIS against this refinery. It's only one of the 10 other refineries in Iraq, but it's very strategic in its position. And the Iraqi army, only one unit of the Iraqi army stood against these ISIS very, very clearly and very strongly. They used 90 vehicles, 28 suicide bombers. They used armored bulldozers just to get across to the Beji refinery. So there's a misconception that if Mosul fell like that, it was really because of the lack of credibility and the lack of professionalism from the local policemen mostly, rather than the army. So ISIS will definitely not reach their goal, but they have another goal, which is world terrorism. And if the world does not cooperate and help Iraq in the way that Iraq asks for help, not in the way that the world sees how it should help Iraq, exactly how Iraq asks for it, if the world community does not help Iraq, then do expect terrorism to reach as far as the USA and Europe. This is very sad. We don't want this to happen, but even William Hague said that there are 400 Brightons who are now helping ISIS, and they could well easily come back to this country, and that would be extremely detrimental, and that would be a very, very sad moment, because we keep saying this is a threat that must be taken seriously, and the Iraqi government must be helped out by the world community.
Well, let's discuss the U.S.'s influence in this crisis. Would you say that Washington is using this growing militant threat as a pretext to oust Maliki's government?
Well, they can try to seize the opportunity, if you like, but at the end of the day, America is no longer the same America that used to be. John Kerry came to the region, he hardly made any difference. They're dragging their feet on how to do and how to deal with this. Before Iraq, they had Ukraine, and what did they do about it? Hardly anything. They will try to exert some influence. Well, they had the strategic framework agreement with Iraq, which is, according to that strategic framework with Iraq, they had to have security cooperation with Iraq and help it to maintain its sovereignty and defeat any threats to Iraq. Well, they failed to do that. So basically, they failed to achieve or to honor their part of the agreement, the strategic framework agreement that was signed with Iraq. If they fail to do something as simple as that, if they fail to deliver arms contracts that the Iraqis have already paid for, and they have delayed and delayed and delayed from their side, well, really, what influence do they expect to fill in? Because they haven't done anything in return for their influence to be applied in the region. They will, of course, try to exert some pressure, but I doubt that they will have any meaningful contribution to how events will turn out. We have 2 million volunteers standing up. We had, like I said, 2 months ago, we had the elections. Over 60% of the Iraqis took part in that. They by no means will accept anyone to try to change their will.
All right, Hani Ali, the director for the Iraqi Center for Integration and Cohesion, thank you very much for weighing in on that. A suicide bomber blew himself up at a hotel in the Lebanese capital of Beirut as Lebanese security forces stormed his room. The explosion wounded at least 11 people. Our Beirut correspondent Hussein Al-Mosawi was at the blast site and filed the following report.
A suicide bomber blew himself up at a hotel in the Lebanese capital of Beirut on Wednesday evening during a security raid, in the third explosion to target the country in less than a week. According to the Lebanese Red Cross, 11 people were injured in the blast, including 7 civilians and 4 general security members. Security sources said that the bomber was a Saudi national who blew himself up in his room. TV footage showed broken windows and flames shooting from the 3rd and 4th floors of the Duray Hotel, located in the bustling district of Rouche, a few meters away from the Saudi embassy.
I was here having my coffee and I heard a big bang. Then I saw smoke rising from the Duray Hotel. Such attack will not intimidate us.
I have a shop in this neighborhood, only 50 meters away from the blast site. I heard the bomb going off. There was no suspicious movement before the bomb.
Security sources told Al-Tijah TV that security forces were able to arrest a suspect at the hotel, who was a potential suicide bomber. Interior Minister Nuhad Al-Mashnouk said the potential bomber was a Saudi national and was currently being treated at a Beirut hospital. Meanwhile, the shadowy Free Sunnis of Baalbek Brigade claimed responsibility for the bombings, saying that, quote, other jihadists managed to flee the blast scene. The explosion comes just 2 days after a suicide bomber killed a general security sergeant at a checkpoint in the Beirut suburb of Tayouni. And on June 20th, a suicide bomber killed a police officer at a checkpoint in the East Lebanon town of Dahr al-Baydar, coinciding with a raid on a Beirut hotel and the arrest of several terror suspects. In the third attack in less than a week, Lebanon seems to be entering a new phase of violence, in which many believe could be the start of a new deadly chapter. Hussein Al-Mosawi, Al-Tijah TV, Beirut.
Political analyst Ridwan Rizk is with us now in our Beirut studios to discuss this further. Mr. Rizk, how significant is this attack on the Duray Hotel in Beirut's Rouche district, especially given that it is the 3rd such incident in the past week?
Well, first I would like to comment on preparing preparing the West must prepare themselves for sceneries like this, because I believe that such incidents and such sleeping terrorism, is going to move to the Western world. Because after all, those people knows nothing about humanity and knows nothing about modernization or any kind of life, because the way that they have attacked Lebanon, and the brutal way, they were, the aggressive way, they mean life means nothing to them, and they are willing to go as far as they want to with no restrictions whatsoever. So second of all, that's the 14th of March forces in Lebanon must pay the price for that, because their speech for the past couple of years during the Syrian issues and during the Syrian crisis, the way that they have dealt with the crisis, they are to be blamed for broughting in such terrorism. And and surprisingly, that the hotel itself is just 100 meters away from, just across the road from the Saudi Arabia embassy. While I can say that the ambassador did not know about his Saudi's residents coming to Lebanon, willing to kill themselves or to commit suicide against civilians, targeting civilians, points in Beirut. The situation is very difficult. They are trying to drag Lebanon into such a sectarian war, to destroy Lebanon the way they have destroyed most of the Arab countries, the way that they have destroyed Iraq and Syria now, together, and now it's the turn of Lebanon. So there are some political groups in Lebanon must pay the price and must be held responsible for their speech, which is by provoke the situation in Lebanon, and to provoke the Sunnis in Lebanon, to say, just to put them in a way that they are under threat, under the danger of the Shiite in Lebanon, so they can stand up and hold their arms against some other Shiite or other Lebanese people. And most surprisingly, that's the runner away, the deserter Ahmad al-Asir, the one who was committed a massacre against the Lebanese army. His fingerprints were very clear in the Tayuni explosion. So and now it's connected to this explosion also. For how long can the Lebanese people hold themselves from retaliating, or just capturing those people and just take them to jail and make them pay the price for their commitments, for their what they have done to the country so far? Because I believe, and as we have entered the studio, we have heard the latest news that clashes is going between sleeping cells around the hotel and the Lebanese army. That means we are under the invasion of Al-Qaeda group. And
right, let's elaborate on that. To what degree is this recent string of bombings across Lebanon related to the unrest in Syria and Iraq?
For sure, they have considered that Lebanon is a place where they should come in for jihad. So this is something this is the story that we have heard, and most surprisingly, it's coming under two elections in Syria and in Iraq. And the election that didn't take place in Lebanon, we have this kind of situation. We don't have a president. The whole situation is unleashed, and that puts Lebanon in a very dangerous way. We are under the invasion of Daesh, and we must understand that the celebration took place in some cities of Lebanon, celebrating the explosion in Tayuni. That was a shame of some Lebanese people to celebrate the blood of their just fellow citizens. It's so much that the politicians who are protecting and giving all the permissions or supporting those groups must be held responsible, and things cannot be hidden anymore. It must be clear that anybody can cooperate and just allow those people to operate in Lebanon must be held as a criminal, despite his rank or his position in the government. So there's no more restrictions, no more just the CVs or VIPs positions in the government. Everybody must be responsible, because the whole country is in a very dangerous situation, and it can lead to the Lebanese people into another bloodshed by those Saudis who consider that Lebanon is the country that they are allowed or they are free to do whatever they want. They are not. Lebanon is for the Lebanese, and Lebanon is going to be just for the resistance against Israel, supporting the situation in Syria against all Takfiri groups, all fundamentalist groups. We don't need anybody to come and teach us how to follow God and how to pray and how to practice our religion. We know very well this. We don't know them. We don't need them to come to Lebanon, neither a tourist or just people who are coming for jihads and they want just to implement their ideology or their plans against the outside plans in our country. So Saudi Arabia is very clear that it's deeply involved in this kind of actions against Lebanon, and Saudi Arabia and the Saudi ambassador must be kicked out as soon as possible by the Lebanese government, because this ambassador is playing, as we know, that he was a part of the intelligence service issues in Pakistan during his presence in Pakistan, and now he's playing his dirty game, the filthiest game in Lebanon against the Lebanese people. This person is a criminal, represents a criminal monarchy in Saudi Arabia, and now this is the consequences of their actions in Beirut. So we are in the middle of a war against terrorism, against Saudi Arabia and the followers of Saudi Arabia also.
Well, that is interesting insight. Let's just discuss a different course of action. Does the fact that the suicide bomb took place in such a crowded tourist area indicate that the militants' tactics are changing?
Of course, those groups, we must understand that those groups, act with no restrictions whatsoever. They don't have any restrictions or considerations of human lives, despite if they are attacking civilian neighborhoods full of women and children, or they attack a military point. So that's why we have seen their actions. We have experienced their actions through so many incidents before, and now we are seeing a new phase of their ideology, which they are allowing themselves. They consider themselves as just the salvation of the world. So they are coming to save us from whatever they consider that we are to be saved of. We are not. They are operating. They have help. They have protectors in Lebanon. They have some parties, and even some leaders, some politicians in Lebanon have justified the actions on Tayuni explosion a couple of days ago. And now we are going to hear, maybe tomorrow morning, another dumb person who is going to justify their actions in the middle. Now in Lebanon, now we are seeing that the whole season of tourism has vanished. We don't have a dream of receiving any tourists this month. And even if the tourists are going to be the Saudis, we don't need them at all. Let them go somewhere else. We don't need their money. We don't need their presence, because all they bring with them is their filth and their filthy money. We don't need it, and we don't need to bring death to us under their agenda. We don't need the Wahhabism. We don't need to be taught about religion. We don't need to be taught about God. They have their interpretations. We have our experience with that. We have a faith enough in God. We don't need them to teach us how to follow God and how to pray to God. We know very well.
All right, Mr. Ridwan Rizk, political analyst, thank you very much for weighing in on that.
Thank you.
Libyans headed to the polls in a legislative election authorities are hoping will end the political turmoil and deadly violence that has gripped the country since the ouster of dictator Muammar Gaddafi in 2011.
Defying the turmoil plaguing their nation, Libyans are casting their ballots to vote for a new parliament as the North African nation takes another step into its transition after decades under dictatorship. Almost 3.5 million Libyans are eligible to vote, yet only 1.5 million have registered. Voters will choose from among the 1,628 candidates contesting the 200 seats in the General National Congress. Amid a power struggle between liberals and Islamists that has hindered efforts to reform Libya and deadly violence that has continued unabated since the ouster of dictator Muammar al-Gaddafi back in 2011, many fear the legislative vote will be marred by violence. Nonetheless, after casting their vote, former Prime Minister Ali Zaidan and outgoing Prime Minister Abdullah Thinni encouraged voters to head to the polls and elect candidates that have the future stability of Libya at heart.
We hope there will be enthusiasm and active participation in these elections. And we hope it achieves its goals, and I hope that the House of Representatives will be a new beginning and better than its predecessor.
Today is a historic day in the history of Libya, the election of new members to the House of Representatives. First, I call upon all Libyans to go to the polls and to choose the person who represents them and the Libyan people, and make sure that he has qualities of a really responsible person without looking to his regional or his political party.
The General National Congress, which has served as Libya's highest political authority since Gaddafi's ouster, was elected in July 2012 in the country's first ever free polls. It has been, however, caught up in controversy and accused of dominating power, with successive governments criticizing its role as both executive and legislative authority, which has left it practically useless in taming militias. As for the candidates running in the elections, some analysts claim none carry the political or social weight needed in the assembly, as the new parliament risks being run by shadow MPs who will act according to instructions from warlords and militias.
Do stay with us here at Al-Attijah World News. Still ahead. A ceasefire between Ukraine's warring sides begins to falter amid ongoing clashes. Welcome back. Here's another look at the top stories we're following this hour. Iraq's Premier Nouri al-Maliki rejects pressure to form a national unity government, calling any such move a coup against the country's constitution. The Iraqi army and ISIL militants continue to battle for control of northern and western parts of Iraq. A suicide bomber detonates explosives at a hotel in the Lebanese capital during a security raid, injuring 11 people. And Libyans vote for a new parliament amid ongoing violence. A Bahraini court has acquitted one of the country's prominent Shiite opposition figures, Khalil Marzouk, on charges of inciting terrorism, an allegation which was strongly denied by Bahrain's opposition movement. Marzouk appeared in court along with representatives of the opposition, as well as delegates from the embassies of Britain, France, Germany, and the United States. The prosecutor had accused Marzouk of using his position at Al Wifaq to incite terrorism, which the defendant criticized as illegitimate. The Bahraini regime has jailed hundreds of pro-democracy activists on similar charges over the past few years. With only 2 days to go until a ceasefire in eastern Ukraine expires, President Petro Poroshenko is threatening an extensive military operation after self-defense fighters in the east of the country downed a military helicopter.
This is the eastern city of Slavyansk. It's completely surrounded by Ukrainian forces, and although Kiev has vowed to stick to its ceasefire, shelling of the city, which is home to 120,000 people, hasn't stopped. Oblivious to the week-long truce ordered by Ukraine's new president, Petro Poroshenko, extended rounds of anti-aircraft and heavy machine gun fire echoed through the streets as clashes erupted between the Ukrainian army and self-defense forces. These are not the only signs of a faltering ceasefire. President Poroshenko has threatened to begin a powerful new military campaign in the east after self-defense forces shot down a Ukrainian army helicopter, killing 9 people in Donetsk. Ukraine's president called for talks with his Russian counterpart, President Vladimir Putin, in an apparent attempt to salvage the ceasefire. Although President Putin has voiced his commitment towards the talks, stressing the need for dialogue between warring factions, doubt over Russia's intentions was apparent during a NATO meeting in Brussels.
And I regret to say that we see no signs that Russia is respecting its international commitments. So today we will review our relations with Russia and decide what to do next.
So we urge Russia to take the necessary action to stop the flow of arms across the border, to stop supporting illegally armed separatist groups in eastern Ukraine, because in the absence of that action by Russia, the case for stronger sanctions from European Union nations will, of course, become stronger.
For its part, Moscow said it hoped Kiev and the international community would take heed of the positive signals it was sending over the Ukraine crisis. Following President Putin's request a day earlier, the upper house of the Russian parliament cancelled a resolution allowing the use of military force in Ukraine.
It seems to me that this is yet another convincing confirmation of Russia's policy towards a peaceful resolution and the settlement in the southeast Ukraine. That's why Federation Council members have supported this proposal and voted for it.
As the Friday deadline approaches for the shaky ceasefire, both Moscow and Kiev may need to start finding a more permanent solution to end the 11-week fighting in eastern Ukraine, which has already claimed the lives of over 400 people.
President of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, held talks with his Russian counterpart, President Vladimir Putin, who called for the Middle East peace process to be revived. During his visit to Moscow, President Abbas said that he wanted to strengthen relations with Russia.
Of course, we all want to see that the peace process is renewed. I know there are many difficulties. I am glad to have an opportunity to exchange opinions on what we can do all together to move forward.
As you have noticed, there are many important issues in the region, but also in addition to this, what is important is that we want to develop our bilateral relations.
Well, in a fresh wave of aggression, Israeli warplanes carried out 12 air raids on the Gaza Strip overnight, as Israeli troops continue their collective punishment of Palestinians by detaining scores overnight in an apparent search for 3 missing Israeli settlers.
Israeli aggression against Palestinians is continuing unabated. Zionist forces launched a series of overnight air raids, striking 5 targets in northern Gaza, as well as 2 other sites in the central and southern areas of the Strip, leaving 2 people injured. And in a tragic turn of events, a Palestinian child who was seriously wounded on Tuesday following an Israeli air raid died of her injuries overnight. There has been a noticeable uptick in the Zionists' regime assaults, which has manifested in a series of almost nightly airstrikes against the Palestinians. With that in mind, Israeli troops continue to stage a wide-ranging manhunt for 3 teenagers who apparently disappeared from the southern West Bank on June 12, detaining a staggering number of Palestinians without charge. Israeli occupation forces detained 17 Palestinians in the West Bank overnight alone, including a Palestinian MP. The latest detentions has brought the number of Palestinians detained to 371 in the 2 weeks since the Zionist settlers apparently disappeared in the southern West Bank. So far, there has been no claim of responsibility and no sign of the missing settlers. Palestinians living in the town of Yara village, south of Al-Khalil, reported that Israeli soldiers had physically abused several people as they entered their homes. Others accused the troops of stealing money and gold during the raids. For now, it appears that the list of crimes carried out by the Zionist regime has no bounds, with no concerted international effort or will to stop its ongoing human rights violation of Palestinians.
63 Palestinian detainees being held in Israeli jails who had refused food for 62 days have suspended their hunger strike after reaching a deal with the Israeli prison service.
Last night, after occupation forces met with the representative of the prisoners on hunger strike, they reached an agreement which resulted in their announcing the suspension of their hunger strike and not cancelling it, based on achieving some of their demands.
Egypt's newly appointed president Abdel Fattah al-Sisi arrived in the Algerian capital for his first foreign visit as head of state. Sisi said that the goal behind his trip was to discuss challenges facing both Arab states, including terrorism and the situation in neighboring Libya.
We have relations and many strategic issues in common with Algeria. A pressing problem right now is terrorism, which we need to deal and work on together. There is an explosive situation in Libya and it's our neighboring country.
Well, amid the ever-expanding militancy across the Middle East, the Arab Lawyers Alliance in Cairo has formed the Arab Organization to Fight Terrorism. Our correspondent Karim Azzeddin has the details.
Representatives from several Arab countries have announced the formation of a new body tasked with combating the threat of terrorism. The signatories of the Arab Organization to Fight Terrorism, whose formation was announced in Cairo by the Arab Lawyers Alliance, or the AOFT, include countries like Iraq, Syria, Egypt, and Lebanon.
Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis and similar terrorist organizations are not strong after all. The media and propaganda have built up such weak militant groups.
I believe that this new entity is the only party that would be able to eliminate the rising danger of these terrorist groups.
AOFT officials highlighted that the sole purpose of groups like the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant is to weaken the Arab world by causing religious and ethnic conflicts, adding that the militant groups are supported by regional and international entities.
Terrorism is not a simple thing that you can handle it in one organization or with one action or another action. Terrorism is rooted within some communities that has to eliminate it. You have to have so many tools. One of them is the soft tool of ideas and discussion and democracy.
The formation of the new organization comes following statements by the Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis militant group, announcing its alliance with the so-called ISIL and claiming responsibility for several attacks against both security forces and civilians across Egypt. as representatives of several Arab nations have agreed on the importance of a new entity that would fight the common enemy of terrorism. A new organization has been formed on values of justice, unity and solidarity, hopefully an entity that would be able to eliminate the rising dangers of terrorism. Reporting for Al-Ittijah TV from Cairo, Karim Azzuddin.
In a move that may boost support for Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan ahead of a presidential election in August, Ankara is planning to advance its peace process with Kurdish rebels. Kurds account for around a fifth of Turkey's population, and their support could be decisive for an Erdogan bid. Although an opinion poll this week suggested that he could still win enough support without their backing. The two sides opened negotiations last year, but efforts to reach a comprehensive agreement have stalled in recent months. The Tunisian National Assembly has approved the proposed dates for the country's parliamentary and presidential polls, due to take place later this year. Following months of negotiations among Tunisia's political parties, the Assembly agreed on October 26th as the date for the legislative elections, while presidential polls were scheduled for November 23rd. Afghanistan's Interior Ministry has announced that over 100 Taliban militants have been killed during 5 days of fighting in the country's South Helmand province. At least 21 members of Afghan security forces and close to 40 civilians were also killed after more than 800 Taliban insurgents launched a major offensive last Thursday in a bid to capture territory recently vacated by U.S. troops. At least 21 people were killed and 17 injured when an explosion tore through a crowded shopping district in the Nigerian capital, Abuja. The blast came as the area was packed with shoppers and rush-hour commuters. Rescue operations directly commenced with the police and army blocking off the surrounding area. It was not immediately clear what caused the explosion, and no one claimed responsibility for the attack. However, the capital has been repeatedly attacked by Boko Haram militants. Meanwhile, Nigerian officials said that suspected Boko Haram militants have abducted more than 60 women and girls during a raid on a village in northeast Nigeria. Local media reports stated that some 30 young boys were also taken, and 4 villagers who tried to escape were shot dead on the spot. Maryam Khaddad with you this hour. Let's recap our headlines. Iraq's Premier Nouri al-Maliki rejects pressure to form a national unity government, calling any such move a coup against the country's constitution. The Iraqi army and ISIL militants continue to battle for control of northern and western parts of Iraq. A suicide bomber detonates explosives at a hotel in the Lebanese capital during a security raid, injuring 11 people. And Libyans vote for a new parliament amid ongoing violence. That's it for this edition of Al-Ittijah World News. Have a good night.